Jonathan.
Jonathan Blow, what do you know?
That
has to be added to the beginning of your podcast opener. That's how we're starting.
The song?
And then he'll leave, and it'll be the easiest podcast we've ever done because we'll just have to end it with it.
He'll be like, oh my god.
Welcome, faithful listener, to Podtoid number 66. Today's a very special episode of Podtoid because not only are we only talking about Braid after 2 weeks of refusing to say anything about it, but we're joined by Jonathan Blow, the game's creator.
Hello.
And in addition, we've got the regular cast, Jim Sterling.
I'm super excited for this show. I can't believe we've got the Jim Sterling on this program. It's amazing. Blows my mind. I don't know how you managed to swing it, Anthony, but you're a diamond in the rough.
I've got connections. What can I say? Aaron Linde?
I can't follow up on that. Although I will say I'm also very excited to have Jim here.
And Tiff Chow.
Hi. I'm very excited because I just finished Braid, so it's kind of awesome to...
What do you think about it, having now just completed it?
Well, I won't go too much into my thoughts about it yet because there's a whole podcast ahead of us. But I did have my doubts before. I was playing it and I wasn't sure if I was completely into it, but the ending really summed it up very nicely for me. So I was pleased on that path. But I am a little bit confused on some angles and some things that happen. So I am looking forward to getting that sorted out in the podcast. Yay.
Well, before the show, we had made we talked a little bit, and you were talking about how the text seemed a little bit divorced from the gameplay. Having played through the ending, do you sort of think that's not the case anymore? Do you think it sort of ties it all together?
Well, I definitely think that the ending ties the entire game together, as a good ending should, obviously. Personally, for me, I still felt from initially approaching the game and playing it that the text, while it served to illuminate a lot of the gameplay in the different worlds, wasn't it. I didn't have like a very emotional connection to it because I wasn't really sure where it was going. And obviously it was all going to what happened at the ending. But I guess that, I don't know, was that part of the intention? Jonathan? Can I ask?
That was a really vague question.
Okay, I'm sorry. I guess my experience when I was playing it is, there's these narratives that precede each of the worlds, and it sort of describes kind of generally like how the gameplay interacts with the story or the narrative that's going on. But what I often felt is I'd read the narratives and then I'd jump into the game and be so caught up in the puzzles and the gameplay that I wouldn't be consistently thinking about how the narrative played into each of the situations, or rather how to solve each of the puzzles. I don't think it synced very well for me at first. So...
Yeah, well, so it was a really interesting thing from a design standpoint to try to do what I wanted, because from the very beginning, from the very minute one when I had the idea for this game, it was this fusion of a book and Super Mario Brothers with time manipulation. Like, that was the idea. And the book very specifically was, a series of what-if kind of vignettes inspired by a couple of other books, which I like very much. And so the question was, how do I do that in a game and have it be as strong as I can make it while not interfering with how people want to play? Like, way back 3 years ago when I sent the very first prototype of this game to some of my game designer friends, 80% of them were like, you're completely crazy. People aren't going to sit down and read text in a game, like, at all. They're all just going to flip through it. Like, back then, it wasn't in little books that you walk past. It was like in screens where you press a button to go to the next page, because that's the easiest thing to program and the first thing that you would do. And it was just like, they were like, what are you doing? Like, nobody is ever going to want to play this game. And surprisingly, some people certainly do that. Some people don't want to read the text at all. Some people kind of skim through it. and then they get interested in the gameplay, and then they come back to pay more attention to the text. Some people pay a lot of attention to the text, and that's really why it's presented in the way that it is, to provide maximum freedom, because a game is a space with certain rules that happen, but where the player can move around and do things, right? And I wanted to, in as much as it's possible, to provide that space in text also, to provide that. So that's why, the reason why it's not on screens anymore that you flip through is because if you don't want to read it and you have to flip through these screens, it feels like you're fighting the game now. It's like, because the game's saying, hey, look at this, and you're like, I don't want to do that. Why are you making me press A 10 times or whatever? And so it was like, no, it's just going to be there in the world, and you can spend as much or as little time with it as you want. Now, that said, the text wouldn't be in the game unless I really cared about it and put a lot into it. And so I think that in the same way as many of the puzzles have different levels at which you could understand them, like with one of the puzzles, you might accidentally solve it and not even understand what you did, right? Some of them that can just happen. And then maybe if you're trying to get through it faster, you have to get a deeper understanding of how to actually solve it, and then you get an even better understanding of, I just do this one thing and I'm through the puzzle very concisely and cleanly, which before I thought was about brute force and stumbling, right? So with the text as well, there are a lot of levels, in as much as it was possible for me to put them in there. And the goal of the end of the game is to start perhaps redirecting the player's attention back onto those, if the player hadn't seen that already. That was a really long-winded answer, but that's what you get for having me on your podcast.
Well, no, I mean, now that you're explaining it, I definitely do appreciate the flexibility or the way that you presented the game, the design-wise, because what I did end up doing, as a matter of fact, is I would read each of the texts and try to understand them the best that I could, but I could only understand them with whatever context I had. And I played the levels, and I played some more levels, but I did continue to go back and see how the puzzle pieces came together, kind of, in a way. But yeah, that was really cheesy. But yeah, no, I mean, I now that I thank you for explaining that, because I thought that was very well done. So
yeah, one of the things that, early on, the game just tells you in the text, like, oh, hey, you're this guy and you're trying to rescue the princess, right? And it gives a little bit of detail, but that's basically how the story starts. But in the style of the story and just the way the sentences are constructed, I am definitely at least trying to hint that there's more to the story than that, and leaving the question open for the player to discover further in the game. And that's something that works better or less well on a player-by-player basis, and you just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Given that the if I can sort of just make reference to the fact that previously you've been thinking about maybe doing an essay explaining what Braid was about, and people are now actually looking at it hard enough that that essay is maybe not necessary. Now that you've seen that a significant portion of the people who bought the game are actually willing to look that deep and pay attention to the metaphors and how they interact with the gameplay, do you think for your next game, whatever that might be, are you still going to stick with the design philosophy that went behind the text in terms of maximum playability for maximum people, or might you hone in maybe on that group that's willing to deal with more direct gameplay involved metaphor?
Well, the question of my next game makes it a very different question, because what I do next is not going to be anything like Braid at all. So my current plan for the next game doesn't have any words in it. Not anywhere in the menus even, or in the error messages or anything. So, and that might change, but I'm not viewing it as a story-heavy game. I'm viewing it as a very wordless, contemplative game, because that's just what I feel like doing now. If I were to make a game like Braid again, it would be a lot like Braid is now. I think that to the extent that I understand how to make that kind of game, I don't see what I could have done better. And maybe after some more time, it's only been 2 weeks that it's been out in the world with people playing it, and maybe a year from now I'll have more perspective on it, and I'll say, here's something I clearly could have done better. But I don't see that right now. So if I were to make Braid 2 Electric Boogaloo, it would be a lot like the current game.
One of our readers posited that the sequel could be called Braid 2 Still Braiding. So just the thought.
That's gonna bring in a lot of sales right there. That name. Yeah.
We've got a quick question from Ryan Rab1, or Rob. I never get it right. He says, did you have the ending in your head when you started development, which actually sort of synced in with the question a lot of us on the podcast have, which is which came first, the gameplay or the story?
I didn't know what the ending was when I started. I just knew what the body of the game was. I knew how it was going to start and what the structure was going to be and how it was going to have the text and the gameplay, and that you were going to go from world to world, and that time was going to be different in every world, and that there were going to be puzzles, right? I knew all of that in the first week, but I didn't know the ending, and I didn't know what all the worlds were. In the first week, I had programmed worlds 2, 3, and 4, which is the whole game up until you move right and time goes forward, and you move left and time goes backwards. Hopefully that's not a big spoiler. Because this is
hearing it very
action in this game.
Are we being spoiler free or
no? We're all for spoilers here. This is all good.
Cool. Yeah. So I knew that much, and then the rest of development was just actually implementing all that, which is a ton of work, right? Like making an idea happen in a game is really hard, especially when you're one programmer, So doing all that stuff and then figuring out what the other worlds would be, figuring out how long the game should be, and then figuring out what the ending was. And originally, I think in my original concept for the ending, there just wasn't going to be a princess, like at all. And then I decided, my biggest objection to that was just, it was a little bit the cheap and easy kind of way to be anti and way to end it in a way that the player doesn't expect, right? But also not necessarily all that deep, right? It's like the twist ending to a movie where the ending isn't that meaningful. It was just something you didn't expect. I mean, it's a little bit meaningful, but I wasn't satisfied with it. And so, the ending I actually didn't figure out until the game had been a year in development. And by that I mean, the last level of gameplay where you finally see the princess in a level. After that, there's an epilogue, which there was an early version of that way back maybe 2 years ago, but I was extremely unsatisfied with that. And the current one went in possibly 3 months before ship or something. It was very late that I figured out what should be there. I was very dissatisfied with it for most of development. In fact, Anthony, I think in the first playtest that you got, that may not have even been in the game.
Well, I had it, but there was just the colorblind issue. That was the only thing that was really different.
Oh, okay. You must have gotten it right when I put it in then.
Yeah. I remember Jason made some sort of reference to the epilogue not being there, so it must have been pretty soon before I got it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm name dropping. Jim and Aaron, you haven't really said anything. Do you guys have any? You have questions, right?
Well, my first
Dude,
question
I'm listening.
was
I'm being courteous and paying attention. Sorry, Jim.
Jim
go ahead,
is waiting for me to. Jim is waiting for me to bury myself between an avalanche of my own pretension, so he can come along with the killing blow.
You listened to the podcast then? Good.
I have, yes.
I'm not so cruel. I thought Braid was cunt-kickingly good, if you don't mind my saying so.
Well, all right.
Although
I don't know exactly how good that is, but okay.
it's not good if you're the owner of
If
the
you've got
cunt,
China, yes.
but if you're the wearer of the boot, it's a rollicking good time.
But then you got to go clean your boot. So like,
Oh dear God.
yeah.
Or
It's-
you
it's
could
a-
just
well, yeah,
reverse
'cause it
time
stays
like
with-
it never happened, and then it's a deep metaphor.
Yeah.
No, I like Braid. Although I believe you expected me to hate it.
Well, my first introduction to the Destructoid podcast was when, tigsource.com or somebody linked the episode where Anthony did the art game extravaganza and had you and a couple of other people on. And it was really your finest hour in terms of commentary on everything, really. So that sort of set your personality in my personal image of Jim Sterling. But over time, I've listened to you read many fine sonnets and seen many other aspects of your personality. So yeah,
There's a sensitive side there. I think you'll agree.
yes, there is.
Yeah, and I'm glad to share it with you, John. It's my gift to you. You gave me.
Well, I'm honored that you're willing to
nice
open.
bits. But actually, on that subject, I mean, were you surprised with how well received it was on the whole? I mean, did you expect a lot of people to find it very pretentious? And I mean, have many people actually said it's like pretentious art house toss, or has it mostly been well received all around?
Well, I really expected the reviews to be a lot more split than they are. Like, I did expect some really good reviews because I felt personally that this was the best game that I'd ever even touched by like a long way. Like, I've worked on some crappy games in the past, and and I knew that there would be at least some people out there who shared that idea of what kinds of games might be good, and that they would agree and give it good reviews. But what I also expected was a lot of people just not liking the very unconventional structure. Like the way that you can basically walk to the end of the game and like have to jump over 2 things if you want to, and that's it. The way it's full of text, and the way that just the art's different and the gameplay's different. Like, I really expected, the way that Space Giraffe got a 2 from OXM, like I expected that to happen sometimes. And it hasn't happened yet. I mean, it still could happen, but
well, yeah, but in terms of fairness, Space Giraffe was a giant pile of shit.
No, Space Giraffe is the best game on Live Arcade.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, I probably should have warned you guys beforehand with our anti-Space Giraffe tirades.
No.
So this is the part where you bury yourself and we strike.
Yes.
When it comes to Space Giraffe.
No, I don't want to divert the conversation from Braid or anything, but I'm just deathly curious because I've never heard it from a developer's perspective. What do you like about Space Giraffe?
Well, so I'll tell you what I don't like, which is, I think a lot of people understand this, which is just that the game isn't very good at communicating itself to the player, right? Like, you play the tutorial and it's kind of like a bad version of Tempest and you give up on it. And the first time I played it, I thought it was really mediocre, right? But then, there wasn't anything else coming out good on Live Arcade, so I started playing a little more and putting a little more effort in, and it's an amazing game. Like, the game design is tight and it's interesting and it's unconventional in a very good way. All the enemies are well thought out, but the visuals, I think if you look at a screenshot of Space Giraffe especially, it looks kind of ugly. Like, I can't say that I agree with Jeff Minter's color choice or anything like that, but when you're in there and you're playing the game and you're playing something like level 24 when the perspective projection is like backwards and screwed up, and like there are enemies on the screen that like cause the screen to rotate and flash like when you destroy them, and the game is about you functioning as a human being and somehow perceiving this extremely messed up space and magically understanding all the information in it and just flowing with it. And because it's... Sorry, I just muted myself for a second. Because it's so crazy what the visuals are, and it's so insane compared to what you thought you could play. It's like a high. It's like a natural high that you get when playing that I've experienced in very few cases.
Huh.
Yeah.
In that case, what I want to know now is, how did you make a game so good when you think Space Giraffe is great?
That's
the two
adorable.
Just don't add up in my head.
I can't really answer that question. Some things are just mysteries, I guess.
Well, it's some people think that Rock and Roll Racing is a great game. So, there you go. Who knows?
I don't know. Yeah.
Aaron, do you have any questions?
I guess. Oh God, I've got 1,000. I guess. Well, you know what? I guess just to go on a different course, I'm curious. Is that okay? So obviously, I'm sure, John, that you probably expected a lot of analysis following the release of your game, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of people tossing forth theories, and I'm sure you're eventually going to expect that your work is going to be dissected in various circles, But Anthony and I were talking before the show, and he brought up that something which got quite a chuckle out of me, which was that some people are claiming that the depiction of the princess in the game is misogynistic, and I don't know if you've seen any of that. I know it blows my mind. Yeah,
there was a review on actionbutton.net that said that.
Yeah,
those guys.
But interestingly, there's also a review on a feminist blog saying that Braid is some kind of feminist manifesto. So I think that those two kind of cancel each other out.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this: how do you did you anticipate that kind of involved dissection of the game when you were developing it? And if so, did you have any idea of what you hoped to hear people say when they were like piecing apart the story? And how is the reaction in terms of how is the reaction faring with you in terms of what people are saying about the story or how they're interpreting it? I mean, is everyone pretty much off base? Or are you pretty satisfied with how people are talking about it? Or I mean, are some of the things that people are saying like driving you absolutely mad or anything like that?
I've seen some things that kind of drove me crazy a little bit, but for the most part, I look out there at. Well, first of all, I didn't know what to expect in terms of people interpreting the game and talking about it. I certainly hoped that they would because we put a lot of work into it, not just me, but David Hillman, the artist for the game. There's just a lot of information in the game that could be interpreted, but even I'm not necessarily of the mind that it's that interesting to create a lot of things and say, oh, you can have your own interpretation. Like there's something a little bit flaky about that idea. Like I'm not sure. Like it's true that anytime
if you want to rip on postmodernism, you can do so for the rest of the podcast. It's totally okay with me.
No, right, but but it's an interesting paradox to me because at once that's unavoidable, right? Nobody is ever going to receive a work mentally the same way that the creator created it. It just doesn't happen unless it's ridiculously simple, right? But on the other hand, I think that if you just put things out there and say, well, these are just grist for your mind to create your own interpretation, I mean, you could do that, but if that was really what everybody only did all the time, I don't know. It's just not very meaningful to me. So, there is stuff that we deliberately worked very hard to put in the game, and I didn't know what people would make of that because games don't usually work that hard. You could name a few. I'd never played Silent Hill 2, for example, but I've been told that was one of those games that has a lot of things in it that you can see and that you can understand. But I didn't know if people would just play it and say, "Oh, this is a shitty Mario clone," or what. And it turns out that some people have said that and some people haven't, and that's cool. And the things that people are pulling out of the story, I think that if I were to lay down, like if I were to write that essay, like here's what I meant when I made Braid, which I couldn't actually do because it would be like 9,000 pages long and it still would miss all the important points. Like I don't feel that it's possible to write something like that because if I could tell you what Braid was about, right, I could just write that essay and I wouldn't have had to make the frickin' game for 3 years.
Yeah, there'd be no point. Yeah.
The point of the game is the game, and anything that I write about it is just redundant or I don't know. Like, so I don't feel that that's good. But so if I were to write that, I feel that many of the individual elements have been picked up on by people. I haven't seen that many people who put them together in the same way that I do. But I don't necessarily know that I would expect that, or, not for a long time, or not for like a very small number of people out of all the players, just simply because it is hidden, like the ideas behind the story are hidden, and not because I really wanted to hide them in terms of saying, haha, are you smart enough to read the text and figure out what it means, but because something about the ideas that the game is about have to be hidden to me. They can't exist out in the open because if you can see them and you can understand them completely, they're not that important. So the things that are in the game are things that I don't exactly understand 100%. And that's why I can't write that 9,000 page essay, right? I can just kind of point out where they are and tell their general shape and hope that people can go feel them for themselves, which is why, it was really hard to write. But then to bring back to the original question, am I, disappointed or happy with it? I'm happy that people didn't just drop it on the floor and that they're seeing that, like, hey, a game can really do this. It can be interesting subject matter. But what I'm a little bit disappointed on so far is that most of the interpretation that I've seen, 90% of it or more, is about the story and not about the actual game. There's a lot of so Ian Bogost, who's an academic guy who I cite a lot in my lectures, has this thing called procedural rhetoric, right, where he says, hey, games can communicate things through the rule sets that they have, right, through the way things behave in the world. And Jason Rohrer's games and Rod Humble's games are different ways of approaching that idea. For me, I don't think of it as exactly rhetoric, because I don't think of like telling people things exactly, but I do think that there's meaning in there. And I haven't really seen, of all these people who purport to be interpreting Braid and stuff, I don't see them looking at that material. I see them looking at the story, which is cool. It's better than nothing, but I hope that as time goes on, people start focusing a little bit more on the actual game and the way it relates to the story and the way it relates to itself and just what you're doing and how it works. And I think that will happen over time.
Well, and I think maybe... please go ahead.
Yeah, last sentence, which is, I think maybe just the reason why people are so focusing on the story is because that's what we all grew up learning in school, is like you're in English class and you read this thing and then you write a shitty essay about what it means. And that's what we're seeing. And until we develop a tradition that's different from that, we're going to have a lot of that.
Yeah. What I was going to say was that...
I'm sorry, Jonathan. Just to clarify, when you're referring to interpreting the game as opposed to the narrative, are you speaking towards the gameplay, or are you speaking towards the game as a whole, as like a body of work? Just to clarify, I'm sorry.
Well, I don't necessarily feel like it's compartmentalizable very much. Like a game is a big system where every part interacts with everything else, right? But just picking a couple of things that can't really be isolated and isolating them anyway, just in the visuals, right? Like what the choice is of various objects in various places in the game, and what's drawn in this scene and what's drawn in that scene, right? Okay. In the actions that the player performs, right? And what they're like and what they feel like and why they're there. Why is this, in the very first place, why is this a game about going to different worlds where time is different in each world? Like, why is that? Questions like that is what I'm talking about.
Gotcha.
Yeah. What I was going to say a second ago is that's actually something that when Anthony showed me the game at GDC, that's something that we talked about after, was how, as I think that with a lot of games lately, you see that there's this acceleration towards epic stories and they're working in everything, but rarely is it intertwined with the gameplay, or at least reflected in the gameplay. And that's something that I was really hung up on, was the ways in which these different worlds had different time manipulation devices, and how those in particular related to what was kind of happening in the narrative. And granted, I have this. I went to a hippie liberal arts college, so I am bred to fear those really loose relationships, because that's basically what everyone talked about when I was in class. Like, oh well, it kind of reminds me of this. No. So I was like, I was hesitant to prescribe any sort of like ideas. Like I was like, no, I don't think that. I don't. But I played through it again yesterday, and that is something that I'm starting to think about a lot more, and I think it's executed pretty well in the game. That's one of the things I really appreciated about it, was that you can see those elements extending into the action of the game and the gameplay itself.
Yeah, thanks.
Something that's really bothered me since the game came out is that there's this, and we got a question from Dexter345 that sort of echoes this. He asked that he read that the entire game is an allegory for the development of the atomic bomb. And there's been this forum post going around that finds all these little hints and all these things. And I mean, I may be sounding really pretentious in saying that I really am almost positive that the game is not just about that, but it keeps taking all these different aspects from the game and little things out of context and saying that's what it's about. And it's almost like we're so conditioned to get to the point where, okay, the story's over, you got it, that's it, move on, that a lot of people, the same people who complain that the game doesn't have any replay value because they're not playing it over to see the kind of stuff we're talking about, they see these forum posts that say, oh, it's about the development of the atomic bomb, and then they're just done. They might play it again with that mind frame, but they've lopped themselves off from thinking about the princess in any other context other than, oh, she's a bomb and you're Oppenheimer or something like that. I mean, is the game just about the development of the atomic bomb, Jonathan? Is there more to it? Like I hope there is.
Well, I'm trying not to say things about what the game is about, right? Because, like I said, I don't even think that I can do that skillfully. But I will say that, back in the 80s, Brian Moriarty made a game about time travel and the atomic bomb and the threat to humanity and all that. And I wouldn't spend 4 years making a game that somebody already made,
Right.
There's a reason that the story is written in a kind of open form. If I wanted it to be, I'll just say that, like, if I wanted to tell the user something definite, I would have just fucking said it somewhere. Like, I would have said, and then Tim went out and pushed the button and the bomb blew up. The end. But that's not the game that I made. So, people have noticed these quotes in there. They're, in some ways, they call a lot of attention to themselves because they're the most tangible evidence of anything, right? Because one of them's actually footnoted. The main reason it's footnoted is because I didn't want people accusing me of plagiarism, because you never know what people are going to say. But and I'll just say again one thing that I said. I think I said this in an interview, or I don't know, on a forum somewhere. But that place in the epilogue where those quotes are is, it's in one screen that has its own puzzle associated with it and things, right? There are 3 other screens just like that in the epilogue, and structurally, if you're to look at the structure of that part of the game, that would seem to imply that you should look at those perhaps with some kind of equal weighting. That it's not the case that one of those should be the meaning and then the other 3 just happen to be subservient to it, right? Because that doesn't make sense. Because of the way they're presented, I think. And that's actually a good example of the kind of thing I'm talking about, where perhaps somebody is chasing after story meaning and ignoring gameplay and presentation kinds of meaning because they want to seize on that story meaning. Now, at the same time, I'm not chastising people who have, come up with the atomic bomb theory of the game, because I think that's really great. They've certainly noticed a lot of things in the game, a lot more than I've seen in some reviews by people who thought that they were smart. So I'm all for that. I'm all for the guys who put together all those ideas and came up with that interpretation.
Right on. Jim, you've got some more questions for him, right?
Yeah, Pink Floyd's The Wall. What was that about then?
A lot of yelling and, I don't know, like cartoon animation that is crazy. I haven't seen it in a long time. So.
Alright, I just wanted to know. We were talking about like the reactions to the game that you got online from players around the world that have sort of played it and interpreted and picked it apart. One thing I was interested was how you kind of... Have I dropped? Oh no, there I am. Sorry.
No, you're here.
Yeah, cool. The one thing I was interested in is how you felt about yourself being picked apart, especially, I mean, we've got this kind of culture in the games industry now where developers are becoming sort of celebritized, as it were, and so that's kind of happened to yourself, and there's a lot of talk about you. I mean, how are you taking to this constant coverage about yourself? I mean, I satirized it yesterday with you when I asked you what colour shirt you were wearing that day. It's just this kind of, that's what happens now with developers. I mean, A, how are you taking to that constant coverage of yourself? And B, do you think that celebritizing developers, or at least recognizing developers a lot more, is a good thing for the industry?
Well, I like it in some ways, because certainly if there's a lot of hype about the game now or whatever, maybe that'll help sell copies of the game. But realistically, if you look at the curve for Xbox Live kind of sales, most of the sales of Braid have probably already happened, or like half of them have, right? And you can predict what they are. So, that doesn't necessarily even impact that too much. But maybe in 3 years when my next game comes out, people will be like, oh yeah, it's that guy, and at least they'll remember me. Now the problem is, what are they going to remember? And this is what grieves me about this whole thing, which is that really what I say anywhere, whether it's in a lecture or an interview or anything like that, has pretty much nothing to do with what ends up on blogs and what ends up in, what people end up thinking about me and then flaming me for when they post comments, because so like there was this
taking everything you say out of context and posting it, just so you know. I'll be twisting, sensationalizing whatever you say. I'm a blogger, it's what I do.
Yeah, but I'm not exactly complaining about it actually, because this is a natural part of the process, right? So if I give a lecture for an hour and it's got a lot of stuff in it, right, or an interview for an hour. Let's say I do an interview for an hour, because that's a lot of what we're talking about in this question. The person who's writing up that interview is going to edit it down into something small, and they're going to only include the things that they think are most interesting. And it's not even necessarily out of context, but if they cut 50 minutes of material in order to keep 10 minutes of material, and 5 minutes of that is me complaining about something Microsoft did, during development and me being grumpy, that's 5 minutes out of an hour, but now it's half all of a sudden because of the editing. And then a blogger makes a link to the interview, and that's the notable half. And so then they talk about that one piece, right? So what it comes down to is, if I say anything at all, negative or controversial or anything, that's what people read, and people don't read the rest. And again, it's the natural way that news reporting happens. So I don't know that I can complain about that. But then people, posting in comments, actually not so much on Destructoid as I've noticed, but man, on Joystick and Kotaku, they fucking hate me. Like they'll read one sentence and they'll just be like, "Oh, this guy should be grateful to Microsoft for publishing his game. He should be thankful." Or like, he spent $180,000 and he's having a hard time recouping that. He must be horrible at managing money. I'm a programmer and I don't see how he couldn't have made Braid for less than 20 quid. It becomes an avalanche, and I don't like that. Not only do I not like everybody hating me for really, really small things and ignoring the other things that I said, but if when I say stuff, hopefully I'm saying it because people want to hear it. And if I go and I see a blog posting and a lot of people are acting like they didn't want to hear what was being said in that posting, and that's the part of my personality that's getting to them, that's not how I want to represent myself to the world. But it's something I have no control over, unless I do the route that all the big companies do, which is they have a PR person in the room or on the phone line, and they get press training, right? Which I don't know if the audience out there knows what that is, but I'm sure you guys do. It's when you get hired by EA or someone and you're a middle manager or above, you take a course in how to deal with the press and how to answer every question so that it has the full context of everything you want to answer inside every sentence, so that they can't selectively choose things. And basically what you end up with is a bunch of empty answers that contain no information and that nobody wants to hear and that are just annoying. And I don't want to be that, but I also don't want to be
Peter Moore.
Yeah, exactly. Or really name any high-ranking executive from any game company.
Oh yeah, and it's incredible what they can do, but that's exactly what they're trying to do. Yeah, it's
and
say a lot without saying anything at all, really. Yeah.
Yeah, like for
Don,
me,
do you know the names of? I was just say, do you know the names of any of these press trainers? Just because I can forward them to Dennis Dyack.
Yeah.
He and Luke Bernard read them over a cup of hot tea.
Yeah. But so for me, I'm indie for a reason, right? There are a number of reasons. One of those is so that I can make the games that I want to make, but another reason is so that I can say the things that I want to say, and that I feel need to be said sometimes. But if I get punished at every opportunity for saying the things that I feel need to be said, then maybe I really can't say those things as an indie, right? So I don't know. That's like something that's unresolved for me. I don't know how to deal with it.
We've got a kind of a random question that didn't really fit into what we're saying, but a lot of people have had the question. People without Xbox 360s are wondering, A, when it's coming out for Steam, and B, if it will ever come out for PlayStation Network.
So we'll do the PSN part first. I'm not allowed to talk too much about the details of my deal with Microsoft because part of the contract says that it's confidential, right? But they wouldn't get mad at me for saying that I do have a time-limited exclusivity with them that keeps the game off of PSN and WiiWare for a while. After that time is up, I could put Braid on PSN. I don't know if I want to do that. I've programmed for the PlayStation 3 before, and I hate it, and I don't want to do it. And, looking at Braid, just the stuff that I would have to optimize to get it to run at a reasonable speed on the PS3, whereas it already works on the Xbox. Like, I had to actually, to be fair, I had to do a significant amount of programming just to get this game to work fast enough on the Xbox. And no, everybody who's about to post on Joystick, it's not because I'm a shitty programmer. It's because the game does a lot of things that are harder, in order for the rewind to work as well as it does. Like you go onto a screen and it's full of like all these particle effects that are really subtle and things, right? And they all rewind perfectly. They're not just made up. And in order, for example, for that to happen, the particles have to happen in a fundamentally different way than they do for any other video game or most other video games. In the music, like I've got my own audio system that has to the music tracks are in Ogg Vorbis, which is a compressed format like MP3, but I had to have my own, system for decompressing pages of those and filtering it, because maybe you're playing it backwards at negative 8 times speed, or maybe you're playing it very slow because you're in one of those time bubbles, or maybe both, right, or whatever. So there are all these systems that need to run really fast, and for the PS3, I have to do a lot of extra work to make them run on the little coprocessors. So I don't really want to do that. Maybe I could hire someone to do that port and just finish it up and make sure the quality's high. So that might happen. But I'm not super eager to do it. And part of that is also because if I hire someone to do this, I don't know how many copies I'll sell on PSN because I've never really seen numbers for that. So I don't know if I can make back the money that I spent to hire somebody to do the port, like those are, maybe if I get in talks with Sony, they'll answer those questions. But just as random, it's hard for me as a random developer to have interest in that when they don't publish their sales numbers. Now, PC is going to happen within the next 2 months, probably. I'm in talks with 2 different online publishers, and I shouldn't name them because we haven't actually signed the contracts yet. But I think a lot of people will be satisfied with where the game goes up. And it's going to be pretty much what the Xbox Live version is, with a few bug fixes. So there are a couple bugs that made it into the game that fortunately aren't affecting a lot of people, but enough to really be a little bit problematic. So I'm fixing those for Xbox Live soon. Those fixes are going to be in the PC version. And then there's going to be a few extra features in the PC version, like save slots, because not everybody has a lot of accounts on their PC or whatever. What else? Maybe it'll run at a lower resolution, because this game draws a crap load of pixels. It runs at 1280 by 720 and draws the screen like 15 times sometimes. We use 90% of the Xbox's GPU, of its graphics power, in some of the scenes in the game, especially toward the beginning. And, some people might not have graphics cards that fast, so there's going to be a little work on scalability there and just making sure it runs on everybody's drivers, which is a pain in the ass. So that's why it's not out yet. But as soon as I get those things done to a reasonable level of satisfaction, it'll be released.
Groovy. Aaron or Tiff, questions? Otherwise, I'm just going to keep throwing out reader stuff.
Keep throwing out reader stuff.
Okay.
If I could just quickly... Or Tiff, please, go first.
No, go ahead, Jim, and then I'll ask my question.
Okay, well, I was just going to sandwich it in because you mentioned you were talking about the PSN, and you were talking about how you weren't sure how many sales or how much money you could make from that. One thing I wanted to ask you, because it was asked in a post I wrote about Braid's sales at one point, where they were talking about quotes from you where you said you didn't care how much you made, you weren't doing it for the money, you weren't interested in how well the game was doing, and then there are other quotes saying, indicating that you do care how much it sells and how much money you and the question is that people want clearing up is, do you care how much it sells, or don't you care how much it sells?
Yes, so
really
it's the answer to that is that it's a little bit paradoxical, and it's a function of what time it is, right? So during development, I feel that it's very important, because I'm an indie, right? The main power that I have is design freedom. And if I worry about making money, then essentially I'm doing the same thing that big companies are doing, right? I'm going to end up saying, oh, are people going to like this, right? Oh, people aren't going to want to play big screens of text, so I better cut those from the game, right? Things like that, because I want it to sell to more people. I think it's pretty clear that Braid is not the game that you would design if you were trying to maximize sales. Like in retrospect, maybe it would be, because it seems that it's been received really well, but like nobody trying to maximize sales would have made this game. And that's why I wanted to make it, right? So it's very important to not be touched by that worry. Now that the game is out, though, right, or now that it's finished, I know that, if I couldn't get publishing for it somehow, if Microsoft yanked it, and nobody would, like if Steam and other online publishers didn't want to carry it, at the very least, I could now release it for free and put it out into the world, and it would exist, and I would have succeeded at some level. And that, when I started the game, was really all that I needed, because I have this history of doing a lot of small, little bit flaky things, starting very ambitious projects and not really finishing them, so this was going to be the first project that I finish and is really strong and good and goes out. So that was my main goal. Now that that's happened, right, and I know that I can sell it to people, now my goal is to set up a comfortable financial situation so that I can make my next game under the same circumstances. I want to have enough money from this so that I can fund development of my next game, which is probably going to be more expensive because it's 3D and stuff. And again, not have to make decisions about having it be maximally appealing and stuff like that. And so to that end, I do want to make money, right? So I don't want to... and it's a little bit weird because I do want as big of an audience as possible, because I just value my work getting out to people and then being able to play it. And so from that standpoint, I would be okay with losing money to put it on PSN if that's how it went. But then that's money that I could have spent on this next game, and I'm really interested in making this next game. So everything is complicated. Like there's a lot of trade-offs, and one day I think something is the right decision, and the next day I think it's the wrong decision. But yeah, since I've talked a few times on my blog since the game came out, and I made very clear that I'm watching sales, and I am very interested in how many that I make, and it's because of this. It's because now I'm thinking about the next game, and I don't want to make the next game that EA would make. I want to make the next game that I would make. Now, all that said, I'm very, very happy with the way sales are going now. Like, they've totally exceeded expectations, and I don't actually think that I have to worry. Like, I'm clearly going to have enough to do that next game, and that's good. But hopefully that helps make sense of the situation, because I was aware of that as I was saying these things. Like, people are going to, think this is kind of weird.
I've got sort of a multi-layered question. I was reading an interview with you in, I can't remember what magazine it was because I'm an idiot, but you posted about it on your blog. And they had made reference to the fact that when you were creating these worlds, if you came up with an idea you repeated twice, you axed the world entirely. And I was curious as to what some of those cutting room floor worlds would have consisted of.
Yeah, there's different levels of cutting room floor. So some of them never even got off of paper. Because, I very early on, I did the basic rewind, and then the rewind with things that don't rewind, and then the left and right world. And in doing those, I got a good feeling for how many puzzles could come out of that kind of idea. And I was like, well, what do? You're going to put together these puzzle pieces, so it's got to be a roughly even grid. 4x3 seems pretty good. So there's going to be 12 puzzles in each world. That was a snap decision that was made pretty early on. So then it was, for any new idea, it was, can I get 12 really good puzzles out of this that are quality, that aren't filler? If I can't do that, if I'm repeating the same idea over again just to add new puzzle pieces, then that's not good enough, right? Or if I get 12 puzzle pieces, but if they don't really live up to the quality of the rest of the game, then that's not going to work. So one of the early ideas, in fact, probably the first idea that I had for the game, even before Rewind, was exploring this idea that at the level of quantum mechanics, there's no arrow of time. Like if you look at those fundamental equations, they go the same forward as backwards. And that's one of the great paradoxes of existence, which is that we don't know how to reconcile that timelessness of the low-level rules of the universe with our everyday experience as humans walking around, which is that time goes forward and we can't remember what happens tomorrow, right? We can only remember what happened yesterday. That's something that physics doesn't understand. And part of what I wanted to do with this game is take weird existential ideas like that and try to embody them in something larger, like on the scale of everyday life and more tactile that you can experience. So this level was going to be, hey, you're trying to go through the game or go through the level and get to the end, and then when you reach the exit door, this was even before the structure of puzzle pieces was put in, that I had this idea. When you reach the exit door, suddenly time reverses, and you need to ensure that the path that you took was valid in the other direction, being reversed. And now, what I said right there may sound a little bit familiar, right? Because that idea is still in Braid in a different way now. But the original idea was it was going to be a puzzle about how do I go through this level like without falling so far that I wouldn't have been able to jump in the other direction if I tried to jump, right? Because if I can't go back the other direction, then my path is invalid and it won't work. That just produced the same puzzle over and over again in my head. It didn't produce enough ideas. Some other stuff. There was a turn-based version, and this got as far as me actually programming it, where time would be paused, and you would make some decision, like I want to go right and jump, and then you hit go, and time would go forward for like 1 second, and you would go right and jump, and all the little monsters would move, and everything would move, and then freeze again, and you get another turn, right? So it's turn-based action platformer, and you could only rewind back to those waypoints, right? And again, that was kind of cool, and it felt really different. But I didn't come up with that many puzzles that were anything but the same puzzle on different maps, Another one was, one of the original reasons I made this a 2D game was because I thought, hey, time is the third dimension kind of thing. There's going to be some level, maybe the very end of the game, where you've been playing this thing in 2D and suddenly the screen rotates and you see that it's part of a cube, and in the same way that the levels, as you rewind, you can see a blur going into the past. The blur is going to fill out the cube, and you're going to see time as 3D, and you're maybe going to plot some path through that 3D space and do something somehow by moving around in 2D. And that never worked out. I just didn't, figure out what to do with that. There was a thing where you could see the future before it happens, like the game would try to guess what you were about to do, and you would see yourself run into that monster and die, or get squished by something, and that didn't really generate any puzzles. So, yeah. There's probably more, but those were the major ones.
Well, conversely, I mean, given what we're seeing with Matt Corbett and the Winterbottom team, which I understand you're consulting on, or in some degree.
Yeah, to a small degree.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you decide, when to stop with each of these worlds, and which of these puzzles was better than the others? I mean, did you playtest really extensively, or was it just a matter of just thinking, well, this is more interesting than that, and how did you sort of narrow those down?
Yeah, I was pretty much the playtester. I did send the game to some of my friends, but they're all game designers and are not a good representative playtest audience. I never really had the game playtested by random people until well after all the puzzles were done. Some of the puzzles after that got swapped out and changed, but they were really because I didn't like them or because I thought of something better. Like the last puzzle in the game, actually, the one right before the castle on World 6, actually went into the game like 2 weeks before ship or something. There was a puzzle in there before that. In fact, I'm sure, Anthony, that the earlier version that you played was different.
Yeah, I played that first puzzle. I was really amazed.
You played it when it had like a cannon with monsters.
Yeah, and like it was fun and everything. But then I played the new version that you sent me and then on Xbox Live Arcade, and I was like, Jesus Christ, this guy came up with this, like a couple weeks ago. It was really surreal to see what quickly became one of my favorite puzzles in the entire game. Just sort of thrown. I mean, obviously it wasn't an afterthought, but to me it like almost felt like that because I had just not seen it, 2 weeks previous. It was really kind of cool.
Yeah. That was a really rare exception in that most of the puzzles were done like a year before the game. Like even being like most of the puzzles were done in December 2005, but they would get polished up and simplified and things. But even all that polishing was done for like a year before the game was done. And every once in a while I would adjust some things, tighten up some puzzles, and once in a while I would get fundamentally dissatisfied and change a puzzle completely, but that would only happen a couple times. And this was one of those. And but that was how it went, was just I did the best I could on everything. It turned out pretty interesting most of the time. Sometimes I had a nagging feeling that I really didn't like something, but I didn't know what to do about it. But then if you sleep on something for a long time, or you go away from it for a couple of months and then you come back, then you just know what's better. Kind of the way, people have told me they'll play a braid puzzle and they get totally stuck. They have no idea what to do, and then they go to sleep and they wake up in the morning and they just know the answer, like they just do it. Making the game was like that too. So, yeah, it was a long process. I originally had thought that I would be able to do the whole game in a year, which fortunately I didn't, because the fact that it did take 3 years resulted in a lot of the quality that you see. Like if I had hired more people and had a higher budget and crammed it all into a year, I think it would have been a much worse game.
Groovy. Any other castmates want to? Because I'm just going to keep throwing out reader shit if you don't have anything to.
Well, since we're on the topic of the puzzles and the creation of them, I'm curious because I mean they all see, this is going to sound a little tiger beat, but I'm just totally curious of the I'm sorry, of the various time puzzles or overlapping like world sort of time mechanics that you have in the game. Which one did you think you were the most satisfied with, or which one did you feel was the strongest in the game, if you could boil it down to a single one?
I think it's hard to say. Like World 4, the time being tied to your position was definitely the most satisfying in a certain way because it feels really weird and alien when you start playing it. But it's really just the same gameplay rules that you already were playing, right? But it's just the flow of time is different, right? And that when I came up with that part back when I was in the first week of development, that was where the game came over the hill conceptually for me, and I was like, oh shit, this is going to be awesome. Not saying I'm not, and again, everyone out there who posts to Joystick, I'm not saying that I thought that everybody in the world should think that it was awesome, but in terms of my own personal interest, like what I am working on, I was like, wow, this is really cool. I am really excited by this. Prior to that, it was like, hey, rewind. Okay, having infinite rewind is cool. I can do some stuff with that. It's still kind of like Prince of Persia, in a 2D platformer, but I can do some interesting things. I can have a little bit of dialogue about the nature of platformers, in what became World 2. And then because I was a programmer and designer at the same time, I saw what I could do with that rewind. Hey, I can make some things not rewind because it's very simple. All I do is go into this part of the code that does this and exclude some objects. And wouldn't that be cool? And I just started playing with it and saw all the consequences that happen, right? And the puzzles in the game are illustrations of those consequences that naturally happen from those rules, right? And so then, but from there, the game was still about just rewind, right? And I wasn't quite sure. I was like, oh, is it going to have bullet time or what? But then it's just like Prince of Persia and Max Payne. It's like, what is the game? And then when World 4 came along, it was like, oh, actually, there are a lot of really cool things that I could do here. And that really was where the game broke away from being kind of like other games to really being its own thing.
Let's see. Dan Gale actually has a kind of an interesting question that could get into a larger discussion about the stars. But just to sort of abbreviate what he was talking about in his very long question, he mentions that the game is very much developed, at least in many respects, on the philosophy that the player's time is precious and that there's not a lot of wasted space and there's no filler and stuff like that. And his question is, for a game which otherwise puts so much focus on that sort of thing, why does the World 2 star take 2 real-time hours to get?
I'm not sure what to say about this, except that I don't understand the question. Braid is a game about collecting puzzle pieces and putting together puzzles and getting to the end. So, my design purpose was focused on that.
Okay.
That's really all I can say about that question.
Have you guys, or I guess Tiff, you probably don't know about the stars yet because I don't think I mentioned them to you.
I do not, but I can close my ears if that'll help.
Well, I mean, it's already sort of been. I just said it, so it's already. We can't rewind that.
That's all I know.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, I was wondering, were the stars always a part of the design plan for the game?
No, they weren't. They came in later. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not finding myself motivated to talk about that subject, though.
Okay.
Very clear.
Sorry.
That.
Well, I mean, you've been damn good at it for the entire. I mean, I had the preview build for 2 months or whatever it was, and I saw stars, but and then I asked you about it, and you were really good at deflecting it. So, no reason to break a habit now.
I think you've had some of this press training, John.
It's possible.
You're doing quite well.
Okay, Crash has a question as a pro indie gamer kind of guy. Aside from obvious things like buying their games, is there anything gamers can do to help independent developers?
So, yeah, I don't know, man. On the one hand, I could say, like, hey, make sure you support indie games and go visit the websites and pay attention to stuff. But the reality is, it's not like that. Like, there's tons of indie games out there. A lot of them are crappy. Nobody has time to pay attention to them and know what's good and what's not. And it just kind of works the same way that everything else in the world works, which is just you hear about some game. It maybe seems kind of weird. Like, a lot of people who heard about Braid at first didn't pay much attention to it because it just seemed weird, and they saw some screenshot and they're like, it looks like a weird game with a platformer guy. And it's hard to get people's attention, and that's just a fact about the world. And that's really what indies kind of need the most, is to just have people interested in their games. Partially because that leads to people buying it, but partially because, dude, it's rough. It's rough when you spend a year making a game and like 5 people play it and 3 of them say it's shit, and it's like, that's a hard life, and people eject themselves from that life very quickly as a matter of self-preservation. So if there was some way that we could, keep the indie thing healthy and alive and life-affirming, then that would be the best thing to do. But unfortunately, I don't really know of a way to do that. Certainly not for an individual, because an individual can buy somebody's game and great, that's another $20 or $10, but that's a drop in the ocean. And aside from that, I honestly think it's just got to be indies that do the work. Like, we have to make games that people are interested in, right? We have to make sure that we're not making, shitty Bejeweled clones, right? Or action shooters that are like Geometry Wars but not as good and with laggier controls and fewer particles, right? Or whatever. We have to have there be a reason for people to be interested in our games. That's my philosophy. And I totally appreciate people who want to help. And hey, yeah, help. Tell people about games that you like. Tell people about websites that have cool indie games that you like. But honestly, that's not quite the way that the world works, right? The real way that it works is a game comes out that people want to play, and they tell their friends to play that specific game. and that game either succeeds or fails. And we developers are responsible for the quality of that game, and that's just what we have to do.
A message of hope from Jonathan Blow.
I didn't actually play MGS4, so if that's what that was a reference to.
I guess it was subconsciously. I didn't mean to do that. That's weird. Harassment Panda asks, do you believe that cinematic games, I guess speaking of MGS4, do you believe that cinematic games are in some ways retarding the maturation of the gaming medium? Should developers be adopting technical aspects of cinema and leaving the narrative elements alone?
So I don't ever want to appoint myself as the dictator of what games should be made, because anytime you do that, even if it's a good idea of what games should be made, you actually do constrict everybody, because like people should be making what they're most excited to make. If Hideo Kojima wants to make a 5-hour cutscene with 10 minutes of gameplay, let him do that, because that's territory that not very many people are exploring. And we should be exploring all territory, right? That said, I would like it. I kind of think that the cutscene heavy, plot heavy genre of game or category of game, it's kind of covered right now. We've kind of got enough people making those. We don't necessarily need more people making them. So I would encourage developers out there to explore some other areas. I just gave a lecture a couple of weeks ago, which was about encouraging people to take the Rod Humble, Jason Rohrer kind of thing and scale that up to like a $10 million game and see what happens. And I have no idea even how to do that, right? But that's the kind of area that I'm prompting people into, because those things aren't covered. Nobody's doing that right now. So I don't think that it's the existence and creation of cinematic games that is somehow retarding the maturation of the gaming medium, but I think that it's the lack of some people choosing to cover the other areas at the same time.
Cool. Pygmy wants to know what gave you the idea to make. How did Braid come about? When did you decide you was there one catalyst for it, or was it just a matter of a long time coming?
Well, it's there are different steps that happen. In terms of this actual game, I had vague ideas for a while, and then I don't know. I woke up one day and I knew what the game was. It wasn't like a series of planning things out for a month or anything like that. Like, I find the ideas that I'm most excited to pursue and that I think are going to work best and are the deepest always seem to just be there. But before that, I did have vague ideas about what I wanted to do. Like, I've got this game prototypes page. Do you guys do podcast notes? Maybe you can link to it in there.
Yeah, we'll do it.
It's got some little downloadable prototypes. They're not really full games, but you can play them on Windows or maybe in emulation in Linux or something. And one of them was this game called Oracle Billiards, which I made. Like, one day I watched the Matrix sequels, back in 2003 or whenever they came out, 2002, and I was just really angry at how bad those movies were in every way. But one of the core ways was, wow, from the first movie, I was really interested in this character of the Oracle and the ability to see the future. And it seemed like the first movie raised some really interesting existential questions that were really subtle that I was hoping that movies would answer. And it was like, no, it was actually the Wachowski brothers didn't even realize that those questions were in the movie. Like, they just, I don't know. But so I was like, wow, I am so angry at this fundamental misunderstanding of what it would be like to see the future. What would it actually be like to see the future? I don't actually know. Can I create a game in which you could see the future, even if it's in a simplified toy universe kind of way? So I made a pool game where you can see the shots before they happen. And I guess pool games maybe have started to actually do this now. I don't know. I think I heard about one that does it. But it worked a little bit. It had a sort of creepy feeling like Braid had, where you would set up, and at any time you've got the angle of the shot that you're thinking about making and how hard you're thinking about hitting the cue ball, and it just shows you where the balls all end up. And the idea was it would turn pool into like a strategy game, because it's no longer about the skill of making the shot. It's about choosing where the balls end up, like an expert pool player might do it or whatever. And that didn't work out. It wasn't very playable, and it was just very chaotic. Like, because this was based on physics of spheres hitting each other, the butterfly effect kicks in very quickly, and it becomes hard to visualize everything that's going to happen. But I had in my head, like, I want to do something about maybe seeing the future or other things to do with time, like approaching these questions of quantum mechanics that I was mentioning earlier. But real-world physics is too complicated. I want a kind of universe that doesn't have a butterfly effect, or maybe one that doesn't kick in so easily. One that has rules that are easier to predict. And from there, just the idea, the canonical idea of that sprung into my head was Super Mario. Like, there's a couple of enemy types in the simplest form of the game, and they don't do very much. They walk to a wall and turn around. And, a lot of them don't collide with each other, and you just bounce off them and you run. Like, it's a very simple world with simple rules, and that would enable me to help the player visualize or understand these more complicated things that would happen when time manipulation or weirdness or time visualization happened. So those ideas I had maybe kicking around for a month before I started. But then when I really sat down to say, okay, what is this game that I'm going to make? Bam, it was all there.
Anybody else want to say anything? It's been a while since I've heard from any of you.
Again, I'm just listening.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, John, and I'm sure by now you get this, is that we don't typically have people who actually do shit on this show. It's usually just us, and we don't do shit. So being that we have a guest who has actually accomplished something and created something and put something out in the world, I'm more interested in listening than I am about bullshitting. So I'm sorry if I'm quiet.
Yeah, about 90% of our shows are like, he loves us.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I'm sure he'd be willing to do it wearing a beret and a scarf, but also, he's a really interesting guy, because not only does he do these whacked out indie games that are even more indie than my game, right? But he also runs the Sims division at EA. So he's responsible for one of the biggest franchises in the world, and I don't understand how he manages to not be completely schizophrenic. But talk about a guy who does stuff. That guy does stuff.
Yeah.
He's like the fucking coolest guy I've ever talked to. Like, I saw him at GDC, and he's like nicer than shit. It didn't make any sense. Playing those games, you'd assume that guy's a huge dick, but he's fucking great.
He's so nice that I almost felt guilty when I said all his games were shit. That's how nice he is, which is stupendous. Although knowing that he works in EA makes me feel a bit more guiltless. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. That's like being like this arty indie developer and working for EA. It's quite something. Almost like a Jewish Nazi.
Almost.
Now that you put it that way, I think we probably will have to have him on at some point. Fate Fodder has a refreshingly straightforward question. What tools did you use to program Braid?
Yeah, it's in C++. I programmed it all, under Windows, but now that Windows Vista has come out, I switched away from Windows because I don't like it anymore. It's just they've taken too many steps too far. So I use Linux now for development. But Braid was under Windows. And I pretty much started with a game engine that was not a 2D platformer engine. It was actually a high-end 3D thing that was the sum of everything that I'd programmed for the previous 12 years or so, working on various contracts for people or independent projects. Or when I wrote the technical column for Game Developer magazine, I would make little interesting things that I'd put in there. So I had an engine to start with, and the game still took 3 years. Like that's how hard it was to program. I can see the rest of the question. He was asking about like C# and XNA and stuff, and I don't know what to say about XNA. Like a lot of people who are hopeful game developers ask about it, and I'm of two minds with that. I think it's cool that Microsoft is trying to make it easy for people to make games. I think it's uncool that they're putting out there a platform that will restrict you to Microsoft projects or Microsoft platforms and C# in the future. Because like I said, I made Braid with this engine that I had, and a large part of why Braid was able to be as complicated as it is because a lot of programming was already done. Otherwise, it would have taken like 5 years, or I would have cut it short at 3 years, and it wouldn't have had as many worlds, or it would have sucked worse than it already does, or something like that. So, you know, in some sense, it's kind of saying, hey, if you want to be on our platform, you have to program in C#, which means you're not going to be able to take your code to the PS3 later if you want to, or you're not going to be able to take it to the Macintosh or Linux, right? And that's not cool, because that's depriving those guys of what I consider to be a very large piece of my long-term value, which is this code base that I've accumulated over years. If you don't let people do that, then you're kind of stealing from their future potential. So, yeah, man, I don't know. I don't know why I turned this into XNA bashing, but it's not really. Like, if you like XNA, cool, but if people are really interested in programming games as quickly and as easily as possible, like, Game Maker is way easier than XNA. You know, Flash is way easier. So maybe start by doing little things there, and then as you get better at those, then migrate more toward full-on programming languages.
Cool. Ashley Davis asks, I was wondering what made you choose David Hellman to work on Braid's art?
I looked for artists for a long time for the game, and it didn't go that well because nobody knew anything about the game. It seemed like nobody was interested in it, which, like people always ask me, like, why didn't you think that the game would get good reviews or whatever? Like, it was really hard to get artists to even play the fucking game. Like, I would give it to them, I'd give them a download and, like, here, play, and they'd play like the first level and quit or something. And I try to talk to them about it, and I wanted the art, like, ideally, and this is not to put David down or anything, but ideally, I would have drawn the art for this game myself to make the game maximally personal, right? But I can't draw, and it would have taken probably too long anyway. So I needed to find somebody to do that, and just nobody was interested in it, or you know, some people were interested in and just weren't good enough. You know, as an indie out there trying to find artists or any kind of person to work on your game, you're kind of picking at scraps, because most of the skilled people are working full-time jobs for EA or somewhere, right? There isn't like a big freelance market for guys who do work on indie games. Which actually David Hellman is trying to enter into now that Braid is done. So if anyone needs an artist, you know, for their indie game, call David up. But so it was this long process of, I would have a screenshot from the game that was really old programmer art, and I would mail it to an artist who responded to, like, an indiegamer.com forum posting I would put up, or, like, I would troll for people, not troll in a bad way, but, like, search for people on, I don't know, like DeviantArt or gfxartist.com or places like that, and you know, I would get interest from people, and I would commission them. You know, I would pay them whatever their hourly work was, whatever their hourly rate they wanted for 8 hours or 16 hours, and say, take this screenshot and do it in the style that you would do, and here are some high-level instructions about how not to mess with the gameplay when you pick the art style, you know, and what kind of setting it should be and stuff. So I did that with a lot of people, and it wasn't working. And I went down a couple of false starts with a couple of other people. I hired a really shitty art studio in San Francisco to work on the game. I thought I was going to crank out the art in 2 months. Back in 2006, when Braid had won the Innovation in Game Design Award, and I didn't know they were terrible at the start, but man, they were terrible, and I was really depressed about where the game was going to go, and I was like, no, this can't. And fortunately, they were assholes and dropped the contract because they got something big from a bigger company, but you know, I'd wasted like $20,000 on them or something. But it was good, because that's all part of the process of getting to the end. Sometime not long after that, I'd been posting on, like, I don't know, somewhere, a mailing list or Quarter to Three, and Eric John Russell Wah, or however you pronounce his name, who's a game journalist, had seen that posting, had met me at GDC, knew about the game, and also read some random message board posting from David Hellman where he was on the Insert Credit forum saying, hey, I'm looking for a game to work on. And so Eric John actually connected us, and I was kind of skeptical at the beginning because I'd gone through so many attempting to find people on forums, and it just never worked. And I was like, okay, this isn't going to work, but I'll give it a try because I have to. And it worked out great. Like, he understood the game right away. You know, he does this webcomic, A Lesson is Learned, but the Damage is Irreversible, that a lot of people have really enjoyed. And the style of that comic, like, intellectually, is plays well with the style of Raid. Like, he already knew how to be in that space, and it just rolled from there, and I thought that the art was only going to take a couple of months, but the more we worked on it, the more I saw this game can look a lot better than I ever imagined that it would. Forget even the standards that I was trying to get with the other artists. We can really kind of hit it out of the park here. Let's keep working and working and working, and eventually it's 2 years later. He worked on the game for 2 years, and we finally called it. We finally said, okay, this is it. But yeah, it was basically random. Sorry, was a 15-minute answer to a one-sentence question.
No, that's great. Was there a lot of back and forth between you and David in terms of how things should look and the way everything should work together, or was it more like, you had a very distinct vision and he would come back with something and you'd say, no, this sucks, fix everything, or was it more...
Yeah, we had a lot of back and forth emails. I didn't actually have a distinct vision very much. I had a vague vision in terms of the colors. Like, I knew I wanted it to be kind of bright, especially at the beginning of the game. I wanted an aesthetic of brightness. I wanted certain kinds of feelings in the art, right? And I wanted certain kinds of settings, and like I really wanted to start in a kind of naturalistic setting. And but other than that, like, I don't have an art education of any kind, so it's difficult for me even to visualize things that would be a good idea. I just don't have that. And so David actually provided a lot of that skill. I would say, well, how do we go about creating a scene with these kinds of color palettes and this kind of feeling? And he would draft some things up and we would talk about it over email. And we went through a lot of back and forths. There were a couple of worlds, like World 3, we did 2/3 of the art for it, which took a long time. It took a couple of months. And then I was like, this isn't, I was hoping it would work, but this isn't really hitting the spot that I wanted to hit in terms of like the way the game should feel. David, please don't be mad at me, but we have to throw all this out and do World 3 over. And he was cool with that. He was very, he was like the ideal guy to work on the game. It was awesome. And he really added a lot of creativity of his own, but that also fit with the game as a whole, right? That didn't clash with it. And that was very important.
At the expense. Go.
Oh, okay, thank you. As I say, on the subject of visuals, I wanted to talk a little bit about the actual character of Tim, because he's a very interesting-looking protagonist. I've read comments from some of my readers some of them went as far as to say at first they weren't interested in Braid just because Tim looked so weird for a character. This short, stubby guy in a suit with floppy hair and what have you. I was wondering sort of how he came to have the unique look he has for a video game character, and why he chose this short man in a suit who doesn't look particularly affable or endearing, but there is also like this kind of subtle charm to him. I was just wondering sort of how he came about almost.
So a lot of decisions in the game were driven at the core by gameplay. Like a lot of the background art, like whether things are sharp or like distant and indistinct, was mainly gameplay kinds of decisions. And so that carried to the character. If you look at Tim's proportions, they're not that different from Super Mario, for example, right? It feels a lot different because the detail level is different here, because this isn't a cartoony kind of styled game. So it's a little bit of an uncanny valley thing. Like, the more realistic the depiction, the weirder it is to not have proper human proportions. So that's one factor going on. But the reason he's short and stubby is because a platformer game like this is about trying to aim the bottom of your feet to land on things, right? So you want your character to basically be a rectangle and your surfaces to be kind of flat where it matters, and the things that you're jumping on to be either rectangles or round, because that's how it's easiest for your brain to make things meet up, in your head. Like if Tim was really tall, if he was like 5 heads tall or however tall people are, artists measure character design in heads that way sometimes, then the dominant part of the character, like if you're looking at the middle of the character, suddenly that's really far from his feet. And it's just subconsciously harder to aim that, I think. And I've always found that to be the case. Like if you go look back, like a lot of the platformers that I throw like sidewise nods to in this game, some of them are from old computer systems like in the 80s, even pre-Super Mario. And in some of those games, they had more realistic proportions to characters, and I always found it weird, like trying to aim that. So that was a gameplay decision. The being in a suit, I have justifications, like I have logical reasons why I wanted that to be the way it is, but the reality is that when the idea of the game just sprang into my head somehow, it was a dude in a suit. That's just how it was. And I went through a process of figuring out for myself why I wanted him to be in a suit, like why that made sense to me, but it's just how it was. And I couldn't conceive of changing that. It would be a different game almost if I changed that. From there, there's things like, okay, well, his tie is, kind of central to the character, like it's around the center of his body, so it's going to be a bright color that's easier to track with your eye as he's running around. And yeah, and then in terms of the appeal of the character, I definitely wanted him to be not your stereotypical guy that a game company would design. Like we went through a lot of designs for him, even with artists like pre-David. Like back, Silvio Abisher, a guy who was an artist for some of the Oddworld games, did some of the early character prototypes, and we went through a lot of ideas, like bums and like I don't know what. And we eventually arrived at where we are, and to be honest, I don't exactly think that we did the best job that we could on the character design, but I don't know how to do it better. Like character design is just really hard. And, we didn't actually the slight amount of creepiness in the character. I wanted that. The slight amount of like, this guy's got something going on that I don't quite understand and that I don't quite empathize with. I wanted that because that's the opposite of like Sonic the Hedgehog or whatever, right? I don't want to make Sonic the Hedgehog, but there's still something like I'm not 100. Like I noticed there was another question about, is there anything in Braid that I'm not completely satisfied with? And I would say the character design, not completely satisfied with it. Close. I'm close to satisfied. We worked really hard on it. We came up with characters that fit the game and that work well in the game, and I don't know. And it might be one of those things, like I was saying with the puzzles, that if I sat on the game for another year, maybe I would just wake up one day and understand what to do with the characters to bring them that extra click, to the top of the dial. But I don't know what that thing is.
Ketonic asks, how much thought went into deciding the achievements for the Xbox 360 version of Braid? I thought the achievements were really, really interesting, just by being not interesting.
Yeah, so not that much thought went into it, honestly. And the reason is because I wasn't allowed to put thought into it. Or what I mean by that is there are ridiculous and needless restrictions on achievements for live arcade games, right? So one of the restrictions which everybody is, or a lot of people are familiar with, is that they have to add up to 200 points, right? You can't give more than 200 achievement points. You also can't give less. It has to be exactly 200. So that's a constraint. But also, there has to be exactly 12 achievements. You can't have more than 12, and you can't have less than 12. And so then the question was, how are the achievements allocated, right? I had a couple of choices. One thing was to give achievements for the natural points in the game where you would expect to get an achievement, right? Like, hey, I made it all the way across this world, right? Or, hey, I solved this puzzle. Both of those seem like natural inflection points in the game where you did something important and you expect something for that if you're an achievement kind of player, right? I could have just held back the achievement from traversing the world, but that actually could take a long time if you're naturally trying to solve all the puzzles. And it is a waypoint. You get to a new castle and meet the little dude who says something new. So it just seemed wrong to not have achievements there. But right there, that's 10 achievements out of my 12. If I allocate them to where they go naturally. 11 because, hey, I have to have one for finishing the game, because otherwise that's weird. And then, well, okay, there's one for the speed run. Like, I basically had one to play with. Another option would have been to ignore all that stuff and to have achievements for strange things that you could, try to do in the game, the way some games do. Like, hey, kill the boss monster in such and such level in less than 10 seconds could have been an achievement, right? Or get through World 4 without killing any monsters. I don't know. But the game isn't about that. I didn't want to make part of Braid about achievements because that would defocus the design. Braid has a very strong idea about what it's about. And even if you have that idea there, I feel that when you add things onto it that don't quite match, you actually weaken the idea. You help weight it down and pull it over. So I didn't want to do that. So I just said achievements. If I had my way, there would be no achievements in the game because I have to have them. They're going to be at the natural points that you would expect. And that was that.
Speaking of that, I was curious, what went behind the decision for the speed runs? Because initially I mentally sort of looped the speed runs into the same reign as achievements in terms of something that detracts from what I assume the game was. Is there something I'm not seeing in them?
Well, this is another thing that's a little bit paradoxical. At least, like, there's some level at which it's not paradoxical to me, but I can't explain it effectively. But in my original concept of the game, so there is something that got dropped from the original concept, which is back when I decided that there were going to be these puzzle pieces and stuff, the question comes up of what do you get for putting together the whole puzzle? And my original idea was going to be that a secret door opens up, in the puzzle, and it takes you to a world, like a bonus level. And inside each bonus level, there was going to be a retro remake kind of thing of some game from the 1980s, but where the rules of that game have changed now because the rules of time are different, right? So it would be governed by the World 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 rules and change the nature of that classic arcade game that you're used to playing. And I actually had one of those in the game at some point. I had a full-on remake of a favorite of mine from the 80s, which is actually not that playable now, but anyone who knows Mountain King, I don't know if any of you guys here have played it, but someone listening to the podcast knows this game. I thought it was a really cool game, and I put it in Braid, and it had it had different enemies, like it had little rabbit enemies that would spring out of the ground, and just like it was actually a lot more intricate and interesting than the original Mountain King rules, because like what could you do on a Commodore 64 or an Atari 2600 back then? But I just didn't like it. It took the game too far from what was becoming the core concept, right, which is about getting these puzzle pieces. But I had always wanted to have that idea of a replayable thing that you could always work on and get better and get a higher score at that. I don't know why I wanted to put that in the game, because it doesn't necessarily make sense, but I wanted that in there as a reward, as a thing that you could work on. And so I cut the Mountain King thing, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to do Burger Time and Pitfall and all the other things I was going to do. And Atari Adventure was one of the worlds. So what is it going to be then? I didn't know, and I kind of just dropped the idea. And about a year ago, when I signed this deal with XBLA, another requirement is leaderboards. Like, you have to have leaderboards to be on the Xbox. Leaderboards don't really fit with the idea of Braid. It wasn't about competition or anything, but I saw, well, okay, if you have a puzzle piece leaderboard showing how many you have, then that's kind of useful, because then you can at least look at your friends list and see where people are in the game, and that's kind of cool. But I wanted there to be more to the leaderboards than that, and that started me thinking about that kind of, that replayability idea. And I came up with the speedrun thing, and I thought it would be cool, because I'm not aware of any other game that does this. The first cool idea was, well, what if you speed ran an entire game, and the timer was in the game, right, and built just for you. It wasn't in an emulator or whatever, and you had to do it in a whole session, so it was intense, right? You couldn't speed run individual levels and like paste them together and stuff. So I like that idea, but that's still not Braid, right? It's not about time manipulation puzzles and things. But that at least solved the leaderboard thing. Then I'm like, okay, there's something else that gives the leaderboards a reason to exist. But then the reason that I put the speedruns in was, as I was saying at the very beginning of this podcast, if you're going to do these puzzles fast, it requires you to really understand them in a way that you didn't understand them before. And it helps players revisit the puzzles and get more out of them. So before you try to do the full game speedrun, there are individual runs of each level, or one level in each world. And so one of the levels that people have a hard time on at first is the Donkey Kong looking level, which is called Jumpman. And if you run that level in the obvious way and you don't figure anything out about it, you can't beat the challenge time. It gives you a challenge time of like 40 seconds or 38 seconds or something like that. And it takes 45 or something if you do the level in the obvious way. But then you realize that the level is a puzzle. It's a puzzle that you didn't realize maybe before when you played the game just to get to the end. Because there are different ways, different orders in which you could get the puzzle pieces in this level involving rewinding or whatever, along with perhaps classical platform, navigation tricks that'll allow you to shave a long time off that speedrun time. And that was where it became interesting to me. It became about understanding those core puzzles better so that you could execute them flawlessly. Another example, one of the single level speedruns is called Impassable Foliage. It's in World 6, where you slow things down by dropping the ring next to them. And there are these plants over there that, there are these monsters trying to walk through them, and they're immune to being slowed down. So you think maybe at first that you have to set up the plants to fire in a certain pattern so that the monsters can walk through. But there are actually a lot of different ways to approach that puzzle. The thing that you might think of first is actually clumsy and takes a lot of trial and error and a long time to get right. But
that's how I got through it initially.
Yeah, and you're like, damn it, how am I supposed to do this in a speed run in like 1 minute or whatever the time for the entire level is? Like what? But that causes people to question that. What do I do? And they might just decide to go try and work out some sequence wherein they drop the ring in exactly the right spots and blah, blah, blah to figure things out. But hopefully in working on that puzzle more, they realize some things like, hey, rewind interacts with this in a certain way such that if I mess things up with the ring, I could actually just rewind that. And a lot of people don't realize that, right? But then they work on it more and it's like, oh, wait, I don't actually even have to do what I think I thought I needed to do at all. The actual solution to that puzzle, I don't know. Actually, yeah, I think I've seen a speedrun on YouTube of what I think of as the fastest solution. For all I know, there might be something even faster, but it's hard to conceive because you just walk over to one spot, you do a couple things, and then you walk over and you bounce off the guys. It's like there's completely clean, there's no trial and error or anything. And that was hidden inside that puzzle the whole time, but a lot of people didn't see it, right? Only when they focus their attention on that puzzle will they find it and see it. And that's what fascinated me. You asked before about how were the puzzles modified and were they cut or anything. That was a controversial puzzle to me because it's a bad initial player experience. And I knew that. I knew that players are going to come to this thing. It's going to be fiddly. It's going to be trial and error. They're going to get frustrated and they're going to get annoyed. And eventually they're going to get through it and think that they had the answer to this puzzle. But they didn't. So maybe do I cut it because it's a bad initial user experience? That's what EA would do, right? But I wanted to keep it in there because it's an example of how understanding can make the impossible easy or very strife-filled, difficult things natural and simple. And that's part of what the gameplay is about in some ways. And I had to keep it in there when I saw that. It just had to stay. And so, as I was saying before, like I don't want to make decisions based on what will help the game sell the most. That was a decision that I'm sure cost me positive word of mouth somehow. But I felt it made the game better, even if not a lot of people understand how it's better somehow. For my weird idea of what's better, again, I'm not saying that everybody should agree on what's better. So, yeah, so that's what the speedruns are for, and that's what some of the levels are for, and it all works together.
Cool.
How long are these podcasts, by the way? I've been going.
It was pretty much coming up on the end. I actually was just about to say I ran out of reader questions. So, do any of you guys have anything else to? Oh, we're wrenching on 2 hours.
Yeah.
Jim, Aaron, Tiff, anything?
It's 6 in the morning. I have nothing to ask.
We'll just end it right here then.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much. That was really
Thanks
good.
for having me on the podcast.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Very much so. Thanks, John.
Right on.
We'll talk to you guys, you listeners, next week. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, John. As a designer, what do you think about that? what would you think about maybe collaborating on a game like Boner Quest? I really think that something like that could take off.
You know,
just-
I think
just
there
put it
might
out there.
actually be there might be a good potential between like a fusion between film and game there, because it might be hard to get big name game designers who want to take that risk. But like Uwe Boll's films haven't been doing so well lately, and he might do it. Maybe you can convince him to do a crossover into game development, and like he would be all over that, I think.
I'm sure he would. I'm not sure that's how I want my initial major leap in development to take shape. Even as much as I love Boner Quest.
Oh, that's rich, Aaron. You come up with Boner Quest and then turn your nose up at Uwe Boll.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, now.
I think Boner Quest is a bit above Uwe Boll.